The Chang-Gui. A short story by Robert M. W. Tsao. Copyright 2024. It is past 5 p.m. and Ferguson sits high on a tree limb, squinting toward the distance as the crimson sun fades rapidly behind high western hills. It is late fall and darkness comes early in these mountains. As night inexorably descends, the woods suddenly take on a sinister, menacing character. The normally sunny meadows of the valley below are no longer distinguishable to the naked eye. Instead, they are now cloaked in a gloomy, crepuscular mist as chilly downdrafts from nearby snow-capped Yulong mountains meet warm, moist air of the valley floor. Soon it will be all quiet, as returning birds of nearby woods cease their loquacious chatters and settle down for the evening after a long day of eking out a bleak existence. The villagers of the valley, too, are hurrying back to their respective homes after a long day of toil. As they reach the safety of their meager abodes, they are careful to lock every door and secure every window behind them as in the past 8 months. No one has dared to venture out after nightfall. There are rumored evil spirits roaming the hills these days as eerie sounds or voices have been heard, calling plaintively from the dead of the night till dawn. Anyone not vigilant enough is liable to be lured into the thick woods to horrible ends. What happened to the Yang family serves as the perfect admonition. First, the old man died mysteriously as he inexplicably wandered into the night. Only scraps of his remains were found the next morning. Soon, the elder son followed as he ran out into the pitch blackness, as if beckoned by someone or something in the night. Then the daughter-in-law and the old man's wizened wife met similar ends. One morning before daybreak, the remaining younger son suddenly awoke from sleep, clamoring to go out with a pickaxe in hand and muttering something about having received a dream from his recently deceased mother directing him to a pot of gold buried under a nan tree in nearby woods. The family tried desperately to stop him from rushing out of the door. Eventually, they had to strap him to the bed to prevent him from doing so. His life was spared. Thus was the condition of the village upon Ferguson's arrival the day before from Kunming Air Base 30 miles away. Normally a happy, sleepy hamlet in the foothills of the 5,000-meter Yulong Range, Datong village by now has descended into a deep miasma of utter terror which is so pervasive, parents are warning their little ones not to cry in the night or Chang-Gui will come and get you. In this remote mountain village of old Yunnan, superstition and ancient fears die hard. Even when they are thought to be long dead and gone, they always find ways to resurrect. Ferguson grew up in the backwoods of Michigan during the Depression, the second son of a middle-class dairy farmer. Ever since early childhood, he had received careful instructions from his father on woodcraft and hunting techniques. As a result, the family always had a plentiful supply of wild games on the table at a time when food was scarce, from venison, pheasants, ducks, wild turkeys, boars to rabbits and squirrels. At the tender age of 11, Ferguson killed his first black bear from a tree stand. Both he and his older brother are crack shots and love to hunt. By age 18, the young Nimrod had enlisted into the U.S. Army Air Corps and received pilot training, flying Curtiss P-40 Warhawks and becoming a hunter in the skies. In early 1941, Ferguson heard about the Flying Tigers program based in Kunming, Yunnan Province, China, under the leadership of General Claire Chennault and quickly volunteered. He was jumping at a chance to fight the Japs and to travel to an exotic land while receiving double stipend. This is how he ended up in southern China, serving in the 2nd Squadron of the 1st American Volunteer Group out of Kunming Air Base. The year was late 1941. About 3 months after Ferguson's arrival in Kunming, anxious elders from the nearby Datong village came knocking at the base. By that time, the few remaining clear heads of the village had already figured out what was plaguing them, a particularly elusive man-eating tigress that had moved into the area, and they wanted the Americans' help in getting rid of her. The commanding officers at the base, always welcoming close ties with the local populace, readily agreed. Since they were well aware of Ferguson's skills with the hunting rifle, they immediately asked Ferguson to intervene. This he happily complied as it not only afforded him a break from the dangerous daily sorties and reconnaissance runs, it also allowed him an opportunity to participate in his favorite sport of big game hunting and perhaps bag a king of the forests, which is rare indeed. The man-eater may be ferocious and cunning, but a flying tiger is always mightier than the earthbound variety. Right? By that time, the tally of the tigress's confirmed victims had reached 34. The 30 miles between the air base and Datong village was first covered by a jeep through tortuous single-lane mountain roads. When the road is no longer drivable, Ferguson and the village headman took off on foot, trekking through verdant valleys and rocky hilltops, fording several ice-cold streams along the way. When they finally arrived at Datong village, the sun was already half beneath the ridgeline. The presence of a tall, lanky white man in soldier's uniform and carrying a large rifle seemed to give the villagers some confidence. One by one, they emerged from their huts to greet the newcomer and to offer their harrowing stories. After a cursory supper at the headman's house, Ferguson learned that on the same morning, a villager woman was attacked and carried off by a large tiger that seemingly materialized out of nowhere. The victim was cutting grass with a group of companions on the hillside when she oddly dropped everything and walked directly toward the woods, ignoring all calls from her friends. As she got near the edge of the forest, a tiger suddenly appeared and seized her by the throat. The poor victim hardly had a chance to make any noise as in a blink's time, she was dragged into the undergrowth and disappeared from view. Seeing what had just happened, horrified witnesses scampered in every direction like monkeys scattering from a falling tree. When they finally reached their homes, doors were quickly bolted and furniture piled securely behind them. For the rest of the day, no one dared to venture out a single step, not even to answer the calls of nature, until Ferguson's arrival. That evening, a sort of a town hall meeting took place at the headman's house, the largest in the village. Ferguson met many villagers who had lost family member, or even members, to the man-eater, such as the few remaining members of the Yang family. From their desperate tales, Ferguson was able to gain a rough idea of how the man-eater operated in these hills. As to the surfeit of the supernatural stuff, Ferguson simply dismissed it as a bunch of mumbo-jumbo, not worthy of serious consideration. One thing the meeting did accomplish was that Ferguson was able to enlist the help of 5 brave souls who were willing to accompany him the next morning to find the remains of the tigress's newest victim. He had no trouble convincing the villagers that the best way to bag the man-eater is to sit over a kill and wait for its return. Ferguson has been sitting in the tree since noon, double rifle in hand, watching over the kill and hoping to get a shot of the man-eater as she returns to feed on her horrible meal. 5 hours have passed and there was no sign of anything, not even a passing jackal. Even with advancing darkness, Ferguson can still clearly make out the corpse lying in the clearing 40 yards away, torn and half-eaten, with large chunks of the face missing. The detached coronal scalp hangs over the open eyes in a tangle of black hair and coagulated blood. Exposed, lipless white teeth gleam in the twilight, forming a grotesque rhizus sardonicus against a backdrop of dark foliage. The blood-soaked clothes the poor woman wore during life had already been meticulously licked away by the tigress's rough, rasp-like tongue as it prepared to partake its meal. This is how the remains were found earlier in the morning by Ferguson and his cohort of 5 volunteers. Due to fear of leaving human scents at the kill site and tipping off the man-eater, Ferguson instructed that the body be left untouched and the searchers return to the village to wait for his signal while he sits for the man-eater alone. Conveniently, there is a large tree just yards away to provide him safety. From what Ferguson had read about man-eating tigers, everything about the corpse will be consumed: torso, head, limbs, hands, feet, fingers. Even the bloody clothes will not be spared. Since the corpse is only partially eaten, Ferguson is certain that the tigress will soon return to finish her meal. All he has to do is to wait patiently and shoot true when that moment arrives. But that moment does not arrive quickly as minutes turn into hours and the monotony of a long vigil drags on. Even though Ferguson is an experienced hunter and has sat in tree stands countless times, those were all done during daylight hours. This is the first time he has sat on a human kill, in a watch against an accustomed man-eater in near pitch darkness. By this time the sun has long disappeared below the hills and the only light comes from a partially cloud-covered moon and a few stars in the firmament. Quiet has returned to the forest. The only sounds are the rustling of a few dry leaves on the ground as they are swept by an increasingly chilly breeze. Ferguson can see the gleam of his rifle barrels against the moonlight. It is reassuring. The old double rifle once belonged to Great Uncle Henry, who hunted elks and grizzlies in the Black Hills of South Dakota and eastern Wyoming in the days of Buffalo Bill Cody. For as old as the rifle is, it has been dead accurate every time Ferguson had fired it. With its trusty twin barrels, there is never a worry about jamming. The only problem is that you have only 2 chances at dropping your quarry. The .450/400 Nitro Express cartridges lying in the chambers will make certain of that, though, as they pack enough punch to knock down an elephant and are of the ideal caliber for hunting soft-skinned, dangerous games such as the South China tiger. For practice, Ferguson aims the barrels in the direction of the kill in the clearing. It is very dark now, but the motionless corpse is still faintly visible in the moonlight. When the tigress comes, Ferguson calculated, her moving yellow fur and white underbelly would give her away. Feeling reassured, Ferguson takes out his meerschaum pipe from his pocket, packs it full of tobacco, lights a match and proceeds to enjoy a leisurely smoke. Perhaps the euphoria of the nicotine infusion has a certain calming effect. Ferguson soon feels a wave of drowsiness hitting him, so he secures the rifle on some sturdy branches next to him, leans his head against the tree trunk and closes his eyes. Suddenly, Ferguson is awakened from his deep slumber by a persistent scratching noise coming from the direction of the kill, a sound interspersed with occasional flapping noises, as if something is hitting the ground. He opens his eyes and quickly realizes by the foliage surrounding him that he is still high up on a tree, keeping vigil over a tiger kill. A quick glance of his white-dialed Bulova wristwatch shows that it is now approximately 1:30 a.m. He gropes for his rifle leaning against the branches, then levels the barrels directly into the darkness toward the kill. In this low-light condition, it takes a few seconds for the human eye to focus as Ferguson strains to see the source of the strange noise. To his utter horror, one hand of the dead woman is raised high in the air, shaking and waving convulsively, then slapping forcefully onto the ground, making those repeated flapping sounds. Lord mighty Jesus! This cannot be happening. Ferguson feels a surge of chill in his spine and all the goosebumps standing fully erect on his entire body. His heart is racing so fast, he can feel the gallops all the way up his carotids. He is not a superstitious man, having received a thoroughly modern education with all the required science courses. There must be a rational explanation for all of this. The dead simply do not reanimate. As frightened as he is, Ferguson struggles to keep his composure and focuses steadily on the distant corpse while aiming his rifle squarely at it, a finger on each trigger. Then, 2 glowing red eyes appear out of thin air and float eerily near the ground where the dead woman's half-eaten head would be. Whatever hellish creature this is, it is staring right at him. Just as Ferguson gasps in horror, a bushy tail is seen flicking upwards in the moonlight and quick as flash, the demonic red eyes vanish into the darkness and the corpse is motionless again. A goddamned mongoose. It was only a mongoose feeding on the corpse and making the body move. Thank goodness. The dead is still dead. Ferguson lets out a deep sigh of relief as he removes his fingers from the triggers and wipes away the sweat from his face. For the next hour, Ferguson remains on edge as one simply does not recover from such a fright quickly. The air is stifling and the minutes seem to drag on forever. The night is deathly quiet, with the only exception of a few tiny blood-sucking insects buzzing next to his ears now and then. Presently, he feels all alone. Worse, a feeling of helplessness, dread and impending doom that he is not accustomed to starts to creep in. He misses his warm bunk at the base so much. How wonderful it would be if he were in it right now, enjoying a deep, restful sleep, in perfect safety. His thoughts are suddenly interrupted by some deep-throated, cough-like animal calls coming from the hills to his right. These calls are intermittent and far away, but each time becoming closer and more distinct. There is no mistake, he has heard the same calls before at the Grand Rapids Zoo. The man-eater is on the prowl and returning to feed. Ferguson's heart starts to pound all over again, after too short a respite. Then, as abruptly as it started, the calls cease and everything is quiet again. A tiger is always noiseless when stalking its prey, Ferguson suddenly realizes, and the man-eater could be hunting him right now. The tree limb Ferguson is sitting on is about 12 feet above the ground. A fully grown tiger, when standing erect on its hind legs, can easily reach 10 feet. What if it jumps? 12 feet seem woefully inadequate right about now, and as Ferguson senses his vulnerability, his palms begin to sweat. Suddenly, a new sound emerges from nearby. It is a sound that Ferguson has never heard before in all his years of hunting in the wild, a high-pitched, screech-like wail that sends chills up the listener's spine, much like fingernails scraping down a chalkboard, except this is much louder and longer-lasting. It is made by no animal. The sound appears to be coming from the direction of the clearing, and Ferguson quickly looks there. In the dim moonlight, something is moving again, and this time, it surely isn't the mongoose. It is the dead woman, as she is seen sitting up abruptly and jerking her featureless face towards Ferguson. There she remains motionless for a few seconds, still flashing her broad smile. But this time, it appears genuinely happy rather than sardonic. Ferguson is petrified with horror, but just like someone watching a train wreck, he is physically unable to turn his eyes away. Then, with the horrific screeching wail still coming out of her gaping mouth, the cadaver starts to crawl towards Ferguson's tree on her forelimbs, dragging her shredded lower limbs behind. It is not a particularly fast crawl, but rather assured and relentless. The 40 yards was covered in less than 2 minutes. Now the body is directly beneath the tree, and she is looking up, sizing up the height of the tree limb, much like a predator sizing up its prey before pouncing. Then, as agile as a black bear scrambling up a tree, she starts to climb, sinking her steel-like talons deep into the bark, sending chunks of it flying. By now, Ferguson is already half mad with fright as he points his double rifle down towards the rapidly ascending creature and lets loose both barrels simultaneously, at point-blank range. The muzzle flash, a gigantic fireball really in this darkness, blinds him temporarily, and the thick cordite smoke takes a few seconds to clear. When it does clear and Ferguson regains his vision, the tangles of black hair and macabre grin are only inches from his nose. Ferguson lets out a blood-curdling scream. The only escape he has now is to jump down the tree limb and make a desperate run for it. Even a cornered cockroach knows enough to bail from a kitchen counter when being chased and swatted by a homeowner, and this Ferguson does without thinking. As soon as his feet touch the forest ground and he recovers his balance, a thunderous roar booms next to his ears, and the last thing Ferguson sees are 2 pairs of 4-inch fangs and a half-curled, rasp-like red tongue and a gaping mouth, coming straight for his throat. Ferguson's unblinking, wide-open eyes are fixed blankly into the starry sky. A rivulet of congealing blood flows sluggishly across one dilated pupil, down the side of the cheek and onto blades of grass. He is in the middle of a forest clearing. He can't feel a thing. He has no hands, no fingers, no legs, no body. The only thing he can sense is an overwhelming urge to find a person, any person, be it man, woman, or child. He wants to scream, but the only sound that comes out is a screeching wail that pierces the night and reverberates through the otherwise silent hills. Author's note: according to Chinese folklore, a Chang or Chang-Gui is the earthbound spirit of a person recently killed by a man-eating tiger. In death, he is bound to his killer and becomes its slave. He must assist the man-eater in finding its next human victim, or his spirit will never be released for reincarnation. A Chang-Gui is known to be of a one-track mind, that of finding his master's next human victim. He will stop at nothing, even betraying his own family to this end. Interestingly, the Chang character is the only Chinese character of a malevolent supernatural being that doesn't have the Gui or ghost radical. Instead, it has the Ren or man, human radical. Penned on Halloween, 2014. Robert M. W. Tsao. Rolling Hills Estates, California.